Well, no worries. So we're treating this kind of as an informal conversation between the three of us. So how we wanted to look at it in terms of the title that was given to us these are the skill sets that we have found beneficial throughout our careers. So many of you might have seen the next slide, and this talks about what is a risk manager. And I think our message is in terms of, everybody has perceptions about the risk management community. And what we wanted to kind of get to today during our presentation is that some of us fell into risk management. Not all of us kind of came from the same background. Some of us came from engineering, and over the years, maybe through the legal department and accounting, it's evolved now to where a lot of students are taking risk management at university courses across Canada especially. So there's many factors of a risk manager, as to what we do, and that'll be addressed during the presentation. And I have to say, when I worked at the University of Guelph, we started introducing risk management to the students. And I had one of the students come to me and say, "Gee, Nancy, isn't insurance what you do when you can't get a real job?" And I have to say, she then became the claims administrator for Loblaws. Well, Nancy, from my experience, sitting around the dinner table with my children, one of my sons would typically say to me, "Oh, Mom, what you do really isn't work." Well, ironically, he's now in the insurance industry, and I think he has a bit more respect for what we do. So there's a lot of skill sets that have evolved over the years, and it's just a lot more than being able to say, don't do anything wrong and just avoid everything, don't take any risks. There are things that we can be doing in terms of don't do anything wrong today, or tomorrow just repeat that. So when we go on to the skill sets, when we talk about risk management, while it has evolved over the years, and you'll probably heard it called many, many different things, from operational risk to enterprise risk, strategic risk, we kind of believe it started with the 4 basic steps, which have evolved into 5. And, basically risk identification, risk analysis, evaluating what risks, what alternatives are available for you that make it cost-effective and workable. And once you implement them, you can't just kind of dust your hands off and say, okay, it's all done. You have to monitor to make sure that what you put in place is working and adapted as required. And this is kind of more the serious approach in terms of, we kind of were joking around what a risk manager does, but there are skill sets and steps that we can do to put it in place. And Nancy, just from my experience, I have found over the years that when I'm trying to discuss risk management and the concept of risk management and insurance with my peers within the companies that I work for, to go back to these 5 basic steps is really quite helpful. It's sort of the glazed over look that you get from people when you say, oh, we're going to talk about insurance, and then you sort of bring it down to this level that they can understand and a common sense perspective. I've found it very helpful. And I think, too, if we kind of also, what I used to do with the students when I was teaching was to say, you practice risk management in your everyday lives. No matter what you're doing, there's an element of risk in how you handle it. Exactly. But leading from that is that the landscape that we've dealt with over our 90-plus years of experience in this industry as seasoned risk managers, it's changed. I think the way I like to look at this, and this slide comes from the World Economic Forum report that was just issued last week. It's their Global Risk Report for 2017, the 12th edition. And this is a report that's issued on an annual basis and produced and supported by Marsh and Zurich Insurance Company. And what this slide is really showing us is the likelihood and impact from those companies that have been surveyed with regards to risks that they're experiencing. And Steve, I think that you found an interesting correlation from last year to this year as it related to some of the risks in the top right-hand quadrant.
Yeah, that's correct. From a year-over-year review of the report, which was last year, obviously, report dated for 2016 edition, extreme weather events have moved from the number 2 position to the number 1 position with regards to likelihood and impact. And we probably will talk about that in the next few slides, but whether it's an extreme weather event or natural disasters, they're sort of like 1 and 2 and have been for the last couple of years.
Agreed, and I think, what, based on from my experience, and hopefully from yours and Nancy's as well, is that some of these risks have followed us through our years of experience, but what I'm seeing now is that
they're different. I'm going to call them, they're supersized. So when we have these extreme weather events or the natural disasters, the impacts are greater than what we've experienced probably when we first started out in our careers.
Agreed, yeah.
Agreed.
So some of the challenges that we're facing, and we wanted to bring this more back to a Canadian perspective. And so 5 of the challenges that we've dealt with and continue to deal with on a daily basis look from cyber liability, climate change, social unrest, and geopolitical, as well as brand and reputation. And what we wanted to do now was just spend a few minutes and bring, as I mentioned, bring this back to a Canadian perspective for all of us.
I found these pictures pretty insightful in the fact that, and also it's evolving where our climate is affecting our communities. So for example, the snow in Vancouver, these pictures made the world news because basically the city's not equipped to handle snow because they haven't had to traditionally handle the snow and the ice, so they're not equipped to do it. So this created major disruptions in their transportation and what have you. And Catherine referenced the World Economic Forum, and if you look in the 2016 report, the report it linked natural catastrophes resulting in infrastructure disruption and business interruption, but they also linked it with water and an agricultural crisis and social instability, and that includes competition for resources, the food and the water resources, and that created other significant risks as we kind of evolve. And globally, the warming and the climate change impact not only our environment, but it's contributing to the world's food crisis, and it impacts other things like urban design and development. Another fact in the report last year that I found incredible was that the state of large-scale involuntary migration, due to these factors of weather change and people having to move and really share in resources, it's resulted in more people who are displaced than there were after the last World War. So it makes you consider whether or not our government is going to be able to handle these changing risks, especially in climate, or whether entities and businesses are going to have to step in. And this is another picture of climate change, and this is the GTA flooding in 2013. And it's another example of how municipal infrastructure really isn't equipped to handle the changes in the climate. So basically what happened here is the amount of rain that fell in such a short period of time was not able to be handled by the infrastructure. So there was impact in the City of Toronto, was property losses, that kind of thing. And I actually heard one Swiss Re underwriter from their actuary area comment that storm patterns, yes, they may be changing, but also urban development is changing. You've got more people and commercial operations, that kind of thing, that are building next to waterways. Everybody wants to be next to the ocean and the waterways and that kind of thing. So there's more property impacts. There's more stuff, to use a technical term, in the way.
I like the technical term, stuff in the way.
Yeah.
I think from this slide, from the Southern Alberta slide, and Nancy's going to speak to this one as well, is that one of the things we wanted to bring to your attention, and this was the Alberta flood, is that it impacted not only the city of Calgary, but a quarter of the province was impacted because of this flood situation. Over 4,000 businesses, and if you recall, the stampede was to happen a couple of weeks after this event, and there was about 2 meters of water within the stampede ground. And amazingly enough, they were able to get it cleaned up and run the event.
Well, and we had a new property, a new client. June 1st, we took over property management of a former hospital in Calgary. And June 19th is when the flooding hit, and it impacted 6 buildings with adjoining basements. So that was a long, significant claim process for a new client, multiple insurers involved. And we're fortunate to have had outside expertise to assist with getting that settled. And we'll talk to that a little bit later. And Stephen,
right.
I think
I would want to chime in a bit about what here in our regard is that we had one of our branches, High River, that had about 4 feet of water in the branch, and not only water, mud. And so it came to the point in time is that we ended up having to renovate the entire branch. But part of the point here is that this was a self-insured loss for us. And so I guess at this point in time I wanted to make, while we see that this ended up to be a $1.7 billion in losses, it's going to be different for different companies depending upon their risk appetite and their deductible levels, or whether they decide to have coverage at all. And so from our perspective, this ended up being a self-insured event. It was well below our retention level, and so we ended up in a position of having to look at not only to compete with insurers to try to get resources, we ended up having to compete with other non-insured people trying to get resources to address our flood.
This one is an interesting one, and I think Steve threw this in just because of one of my previous employers, which was Tim Hortons. And I think for some of the folks on the phone, you can probably recognize this location. This was in Sussex, New Brunswick, the one in the bottom left-hand corner. It happened in April of 2014. And if memory serves me right, this store had just opened within 90 days previous to this loss. So, whereas, the companies that I have worked for in the past were dealing with large locations, and this was an individual property owner, so an individual store owner, and this had a huge impact on their bottom line and their expectations. Now, Steve, I'm not sure, were you caught on that GO train that was heading north?
Thankfully, I go on the Aurora GO train. This was the Richmond Hill GO train. I go on the Barrie line, but I did speak to my boss, who was on that line, and it ended up that, as you can see in the picture on the right-hand side, the original strategy that took 5 hours later to start to employ was to take people out by boat, 2 people at a time or 3, and we're at 1,200 people on this train. It was a significant number of, it was a significant delay. There are pictures in the media, which I didn't put in here, but with the snakes that had come in on the train as well, so that started causing some concerns for people. But again, it's just an impact of how climate is not impacting only our business lives, but potentially our personal lives. Bottom right slide there, that's a main thoroughfare in Nova Scotia that was washed out as a result of the 2014 floods as well. So again, climate is a significant impact both from our personal lives as well as our business lives, and we need to be looking to manage those for our entities.
And this is a good visual to show that there are other types of losses that happen. You can have hail, and it's just amazing to see the damage to the home. And when we're talking, Stephen was talking about how within your companies, your employees can be impacted. We had employees during the Calgary flood who lost their homes. And we had a system in different ways that you wouldn't naturally think about. We had one of our SVPs retained legal counsel to help them negotiate their insurance coverage for their homeowners policies, to actually help them look at the policies and see what coverage they could do. We had one employee who he and his family actually lived in the government community, the trailer parks, for almost 18 months until he could get his done. So there are long-reaching impacts to a company.
Well, and the one that I think is top of mind for everyone is the Fort Mcmurray fire. And this, to date, is the single largest insured loss in Canadian history. And I can speak from an AECON perspective, and we are working our way through a claim. And that, from a personal perspective, is being new with the company, a new industry for me, has definitely been a learning experience. But just to give you some idea of the scale and the scope of this loss, it impacted more than 80,000 people, and right now it is estimated to be about $3.5 billion in insurable losses. And it's just something that is going to continue to go on with regards to its impact for both the community and for businesses on a go-forward basis.
Yeah, Catherine, if I can here, at our institution we had 2 branches. Neither branch was actually impacted, about 150 feet away. So we were pretty lucky from a branch perspective. So from a pure business impact on what we would call an insured loss, hey, we looked okay. But then we also support residents in that community with mortgages. And so we had to work with our partners to allow for strategies and with regards to mortgage and mortgage payments and what we were to do with those. So again, we ended up working with the various regulators to come up with a strategy to ensure that we can support those people.
And one thing we're not touching on too much here is changes in regulatory compliance. And that's another risk that's evolving that companies have to be aware of in terms of their obligations, whether it's under cyber, freedom of information, privacy legislation, all that good stuff. It's an important thing to put on the radar, even though we haven't really touched on that too much here. And this slide, we haven't seen significant, touch wood, terrorism events in Canada, but it is on the radar more and more. And depending on where your properties are, where your businesses are, there is potential impact because underwriters are now looking to rate higher risk areas where there's concentration of properties that they have under their book. So like the M5 area in Toronto, Montreal is another area we're looking at. And this is just a visual of, there are other impacts. And I think, Stephen, you had some stories about the G20?
Yeah, in our case, we were outside the barricade. There was a group of buildings that were within the barricade, the protected area, and unfortunately ours was on the other side, which ended up meaning that we ended up having a few branches with their windows knocked out, and specifically our main building at King and Bay Street suffered some glass damages. And prior to that, though, in a preparation, we had moved away some of our statues. Some people may be familiar with the elephants in the courtyard, etc. We had arranged for all of our external statues and artwork to be removed in event that this would turn violent, and it did. And so it ended up we were a good foresight to move these special pieces of artwork away.
Well, and I think that ties us back to the 5 steps that Nancy talked about at the beginning about risk management. It's just not all about insurance buying. It's about analyzing what your exposure to risk is and then implementing the tools that you can do internally.
I agree.
Cyber events. This is, I think what we want to draw everyone's attention to here is that no company is immune from this type of event and or this exposure. And this is an ever-evolving area, and it's something I think that all of us on the risk management side have learned about and become more competent with in the last number of years. And this is an exposure that we're going to have to continue to monitor, to track, to determine, and to think that it's just a retail event or a retail exposure, which I think maybe would have been the thought when cyber first came on our radar screens. It's not. It's something that has an impact to all of our companies. And Steve, I think you, at the end of this presentation, and James, correct me if I'm wrong, we are going to make this presentation available if people are interested, have included some resources, and you have included a resource, and maybe you can let people know what that is.
Fair enough. At the end of the presentation, we put a link there to see if your user ID, be it your personal email address or your work address, whether they've been part of a breach. From my personal perspective, my personal email account was involved in the Adobe breach, and my business ID was notated in the LinkedIn breach. So I had to modify and change my password for LinkedIn, and it brings you back to this whole perspective of making sure that you and the rest of your and have protocols around email and email passwords and user ID passwords, because obviously if you got one password, if you use one password for everything, if you used for your LinkedIn password the same password as you use for your bank account information, that could be problematic. So again, you want to make sure you have appropriate protocols around your idea with regards to emails and addressing. Also, the top of mind right now with regards to cyber events is probably more recently the political or state-sponsored hacking. And in the news, we've seen a lot of, in the last week or two, comments about the U.S. election and with regards to the allegations of Russia, more specifically Putin's ordering hacking and the implications or the impact of the outcome of the election. So again, it's more than, as what Catherine was saying, it's more than just straight up a retail We see many things with regards to now ransomware, whereby institutions are getting hacked and then their information is being encrypted, and then the people are having to pay currency. So pay currency, be it Bitcoin or other words, to get to get a key to unlock their data. So again, it is an ever-evolving group. No businesses are immune to this. It's going to be if you have data, somebody wants it.
And if I could add, I'm going back to my days at the University of Guelph when, you know, the cyber and the internet and all that kind of thing was coming up. There was a claim process called flaming, and you could kind of watch the track of how it would evolve. Somebody would incite a faculty member and get them involved in a huge discussion, and then the faculty member might get a little verbal in terms of their opinions, and then they were sued for libel and slander due to this written flaming on the internet. So it goes back a while. But there's a other practical thing I wanted to kind of point out to show that as a risk manager, you continually have to be looking at your business to think about outside the box. What kinds of impact? Yes, I have computer systems, but what do they operate for my organization? So from a property management perspective, for example, your building systems, most of them are all electronic and done through the internet operations. So you could have somebody remotely hack into one of your building systems and your HVAC even, and really disrupt your buildings. So it has to look at, you know, what kinds of situations can you have within your operations. Kind of think outside the box. And then the next step is, how do we address that? Is it covered by insurance? Is it excluded? You know, what does cyber coverage really do for me? Does my property coverage get into something like that? So if I have a resultant, you know, freezing of my pipes because somebody shut down my heating system electronically. So it's the kind of thing is you really have to think outside the box and kind of look at what are all the risks inherent in your organization.
Now we're going to get over into some of the nitty-gritty, if you will, of our conversation, and talk about how our careers have evolved through the risk management industry. What I'm going to put on the slide right now is, this is from a 2006 report called the Excellence in Risk Management, and was a survey. And the outcome was that the outcome of the survey was that risk managers sort of fell into three boxes, starting with the traditional box, progressive, which includes traditional, and then strategic, which includes progressive and traditional. And what we really want to bring to your attention here is that this is a life cycle, and so where you are within these boxes, or within the positions within your company in these boxes, it's something that's going to evolve over time. And it's going to evolve over time based on your experience, based on what your challenges are within your organization. And I think that what we want to also bring to your attention is that no two risk management positions are the same. So what Nancy does within Bentall Kennedy and what Steve does within CIBC is there's probably commonalities to what I do at AECON, but there are huge differences as well. And so what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis is going to change based on your industry, your level of responsibility within your organization, your risk philosophy of your organization, and the appetite. Do you have low retentions? Do you have significant retentions?
And if I could say, too, there's also a big difference between nonprofit and for-profit. So for-profit usually has an accountability for the bottom line and financials to the shareholders. But they also share the same risks and the same appetite in terms of like health and safety and branding, that kind of thing. But it just may be in a different order. So for a nonprofit organization, yes, they have accountabilities for budget, but their primary focus may be slightly different in their strategies.
All right, so that brings us to, I think, what everybody's waiting with bated breath, some skill sets that we feel a successful risk manager would demonstrate. Now, most of these that we're going to go through in the next few slides were crafted in what I view as an employer's perspective, but I think we wish to acknowledge that the risk management for a professional, it's a partnership. It's going to be with your company, your brokers, your insurers, your internal clients, skills that flow through all of your risk management relationships, not just from an employer's perspective. Okay, next slide. So here we talk about effective communications, and so from here we think this is probably the first of probably about the top 10 that we chose of skill sets that we think an effective risk manager should have. Maybe Nancy, you can walk through some of your involvement with ORIMS and how you felt this was important.
Yeah, one thing I learned involved being involved with ORIMS, and I was involved on their executive committee and on their board of directors for about 8 years. And I had the fabulous opportunity to learn from my peers. And one of the former presidents was the risk manager for the U.S. Olympic Committee. And he said, Nancy, you have to learn to market your message. So I was coming in as a newbie on the executive council, and my first real presentation to the board was to let them know that we've identified a $2 million operating deficit that was being offset by investment income. But, we were going to fix that because investment income had tanked, and, we needed to learn to do the budget. So what we did was we developed a strategy, and I had a ORIMS hard hat, construction hard hat that was given to all of us by one of the EC members who worked for Bullard, who developed hard hats. So I put that on, along with my flak jacket, and I presented to the board. But I presented to the board in terms of, here's the issue, but here's how we're going to manage it. So I really learned well from that former president that how important it is to market your message. Also, I was president during the contingency fee crisis. So I actually met with Spitzer's office, and that was an interesting time. I also took a business writing course, though, recently, and I think that was really beneficial to me, and it was only just a few years ago, because my background came from academic, where when you're marketing your message, it's like, what is I need to espouse upon my audience? What is it I need to tell them? And now, when you're looking at businesses who are fast-paced and short of time, and they just want to know, the facts. And so then you have to approach it from what is it they need to know. And keep it crisp is a term that's used at Bentall Kennedy a long time. And also, too, when I was at Sears, the CFO there gave me some great advice, because all their presentations, and Stephen can attest to this too, was usually done through PowerPoint. And I remember going into a board meeting and the CFO said, Nancy, you're last on the agenda. You're probably going to be short of time. Pick it down to 3 items that you want to address and be ready to do that. And he was exactly right.
Well, I think, Nancy, and you've highlighted there the exposure that you've had to your board of directors, both from a ORIMS perspective and then from Sears and from other employers. But one thing that I also want to bring into this conversation is that we have to be able to communicate within all levels within the organization. So when I'm going out to a job site, to be able to look those folks in the eye and talk to them at their level to get that message across. And so, and I think hopefully Steve and Nancy would agree that the message is you have to know your audience.
Yes.
And also and what they want to hear.
Well, and that's exactly right. When I worked for the city of Kitchener, you're going out and working with public works, and some of these guys are like, what is she doing sticking her nose in my shop? And once they realized what my role was, and I was there to help them to learn their operations and maybe help them manage risk and claims, it just totally changed their attitude, and it was a really good working relationship. And Stephen, I think you had a story about Sears as well.
Yeah, Sears. Sears was obviously in both of our background, but Sears, as you pointed out, had this perspective of always doing presentations using PowerPoint, as you indicated. But the big message that I learned and wish to impart today is that you need to pick the 3 things you want to address with your audience. What does the audience want or need at the end of this presentation? You're supposed to repeat that 3 times through your presentation, and then you're supposed to cite 3 good sources. So I call it the power of 3. So throughout presentations, if you're doing effective presentations, which is very focused versus all the communication aspects of your regular job, but if you're doing a presentation, pick the 3 points you want to hit, make sure you repeat them 3 times, and then make sure you cite 3 good sources to validate your point. We move into computer and technology literacy. Now, I have no understanding why they picked me, because when I started my career way back at Sears in 1979, not only was the internet not yet a real thing, there was no PCs. In fact, there wasn't even calculators. When I started at my job, I had a comptometer, and for people who don't know what a comptometer is, that's where you punch the things and pull a crank and it adds up your numbers. So when we used to do our reports and produce reports, we used to type them, and that was the typewriter, on a piece of paper, and then manually put them in a cassettener, and that's whereby you pour fluid over this device, and you turned it by crank, and out came statements. You only made a lot of copies. So how I got to the point of that is today you need to evolve as your functions evolve. When you're with an organization, you're going to realize that how you go to work today is different than you go to work 2 years ago. An example is today, I'm here in Aurora, sitting in my office, as I no longer have an office at work. Gone the days when I had a nice big office, sofa, my own washroom. I'm now hoteling it, whereby that I sign up and we go in and we're making it a much more collaborative environment, also making it more flexible for the people to be able to work in different communities and different manners to meet the business needs. I.e., if you're supporting retail, you're going to be able to go work in retail and not be in an office in a specific building. So I guess my key message here is to make sure you continually evolve as the world is evolving with regards to communication and platforms. And the big thing is, for me, is that not only is it computer technology that you have to stay current with, you have to stay current with what's happening in the various hedge products and insurance. For example, computer. 5 years ago, there wasn't many computer languages. And as we all know, there's not a lot of standard computer wording language now, and I hate the term cyber coverage. But as we move through, you need to be aware of the various cyber coverages that are out there, what they do, what they don't do, and be able to interlay that into your organization. So it's an example of an evolving product that's been out in the market for a few years, but it's not standard, but you need to be competent and be able to respond and say, yes, this product now fits for our needs, and we're ready to be able to use this product. So again, it's staying continuous learning, staying with the group, and not be stuck behind. Make sure you're embracing change, because that's the only thing that's constant is change.
And if I could just add to that, I think a segue from all this is data. To me, information is power. The more comprehensive and accurate your data is, the more informed decisions you and the stakeholders can make. And your stakeholders can be internal or external. And more underwriters, if you're talking to senior underwriters, it's what are their views in terms of, risk management? What's a well-risk managed account to them? And they said that that's where the data that is compiled and provided in the underwriting is comprehensive and accurate. So, it's funny, I had the pleasure during my presidency of ORIMS to actually go to London, and I was so excited. And people were like, well, yeah, that's really nice, Nancy, you went to an insurance company. But when you look in terms of London and Lloyd's being the center where insurance all started, and to sit in an underwriter's box, and I think they put out a little bit of a show for me, in their negotiations. But the bottom line, and I think the message is, while it's all based on relationships and understanding, he also, the gentleman who I sat with, also had his finger on the pulse. He could put in a latitude and longitude and tell you everything you needed to know about that particular property. So I guess the message is, keep in mind that when you're looking at it, know as much as you possibly can about your company, what their risks are, and the data to me is crucial. And that all falls into Steve's very valuable, advices with regard to keeping current.
The next one is problem solving, and you need to be creative, and it doesn't always have to be that you have to have all the answers, but you need to know, some of the things. And one of my examples was way back when, with dealing with a property management owner, not any one of the two of my colleagues here, whereby we ran into this situation, and the situation was a contractual language wording, and we basically had to, I listened to, they basically didn't want us to sue them, and we didn't want to sue them, and this goes back to the early 90s, and we ended up crafting language for the first time, which we basically said, you're on for your stuff, we're on for our stuff, and we won't sue each other. It meant their needs, it meant our needs, but it was listening to what they had to say and then come up with a creative solution in order to meet their needs and meet our needs. So Nancy, I think you also have some other insights to this.
Yeah, and I think in terms of, we don't always have to have the answers. And I think that's a really good thing to be able to recognize. I don't have to be a lawyer. I don't have to be an engineer. I don't have to be an accountant. But I really need to know when I need that expertise. And I think Catherine's going to talk about departments, but I think, it's good to look outside for expertise, too, to be able to bring all together the people who provide the information so that your stakeholders can make an informed decision. And know the speak, know what kind of the languages that they need in terms of what issues are you addressing and what information is required.
Well, I think the other thing that, and I don't know from your experience, but we can't be considered the no department.
Yes, the doom and gloom lady.
The doom and gloom, exactly. So I think what we have to be proactive and to understand as well that you are the internal expert, if you will, and I've been called that many times, and I cringe every time I am. Here's the company's expert on insurance. But you are the one that people are turning to within your organization to answer those questions, those difficult questions, if you will, about insurance. And it's not only just understanding the products that are out there, but how the agreements and the contracts dovetail so that you are filling in the gaps. And it's the other thing that's really important is to be proactive, to be always thinking ahead, to understand the businesses that your company is involved in. And I'm still, oh my goodness, with AECON, there's so much to learn. But it's a function of finding those resources externally, as you've talked about, Nancy, and bringing them in so that we are acting proactively and problem solving for our
work. If I can jump in here too, I remember this is a funny story for me, and in that I call it the elephant story. When I was at Sears, we had just bought Eaton's, and we were going to be expanding the Eaton's, and so we had our new CEO, relatively new CEO, and our new executive VP of marketing, and they had this brilliant idea, and so in comes the head of marketing to my office and closed the door and said, I got something to discuss with you. We want to bring an elephant into the building, into our auditorium as part of our presentation. And I was agog. Again, you don't want to be the no person. You don't want to be the impediment. You don't want to be the roadblock. But I had to learn a lot about elephants in captivity and how to get some expertise help. And bottom line came out, we did not bring the elephant into the building. I relented and had the elephant out in the parking lot, and we were able to still achieve the marketing hit that they wanted to get. But it was, so it's again, you have to be creative in coming up with solutions sometimes.
Teamwork. I think here, and from my experience, that the risk management group department function within organizations is usually pretty lean and mean. It's you plus one or two. I've had a couple of opportunities where it's me plus six, which is awesome. But the teamwork, from my experience, has been not only internally with the stakeholders, but also externally. And the team that you deal with, your broker, your insurer, your adjusters, and it's very important to have that external team in place and to have a good working relationship with them. And I don't know from Nancy and Steve's perspective what your take is on.
I agree. And to your point earlier, being viewed as the expert within your organization because they're going to come to you, but also coming up with the solutions. And a lot of times I do look to my broker. They can tell you I have speed dial sometimes on their numbers in terms of, assisting me in how are we going to address this. Not just, it's too scary, too risky, but how can we manage it and what are the risks so that we can go back and say, yes, you have coverage here, or, it might not step up for this kind of situation, but here's what we can do to address it. So, I agree. That's what I said too, bringing in the experts as required, so that I'm always continuing. And I learn something new every single day. When that phone rings, that's what's so cool about my job, because you never know what's going to be on the other end of that line when the phone rings. And what other position within your organization, other maybe than audit, gets to go all throughout your organization on site visits and what have you, depending on, what element of risk you're involved in. But I know when I worked at the University of Guelph, I got to go places that even the deans didn't get to go, because I was going into areas where they have a nuclear facility and taking the underwriters in so that they can see it and do some kinds of inspections. It was very cool.
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly. The teamwork, and it's a critical component of being successful as a risk manager, is that you are seen to be a member of the team and not somebody who's there to roadblock. And often, especially if you get creative, as per the previous slide, and come up with a solution that enables them to meet their objectives and let you do your objective, which is manage the risk for the business. It could be a hedge product. It could be doing it in a different manner. It could be putting some safety protocols in place that allow us to go ahead. So it, again, is being a team member means helping the team, the company, the entity achieve its goal.
So I think we're looking at leadership, and in my experience, I think it comes from experience. What do you learn from your peers? Getting to know what the goals and issues are for your company, be informed, but, believe in what you're doing. And I learned a lot, again, from serving on the RIMS Executive Council and the board, but I learned from my peers as well, from being involved to the issues that were presented. I was also president when enterprise risk management was first on the radar, and I was involved in striking RIM's first ERM committee chaired by John Phelps. So, I think leadership comes from experience and, getting involved and being able to take into consideration other people's involvement in what you're doing as well. Again, going back to teamwork as well.
Financial acuity. And
Yep.
Steve, I think you can speak to this a bit more in the sense that you come from a financial background.
Yeah, and I think it's critical. Again, it's coming back. We should know what the business is. It's pretty difficult to be the risk manager of a retailer, and if you don't understand the issue about, how you pay for your merchandise, where is the potential breaks in that chain, how you get the merchandise out onto the floor, and then how does a customer take it back. You need to be able to understand the different aspects of the business. It'd be pretty difficult being, as a risk manager for your entity if you don't understand how the business makes its money and where it goes. And so I think it's important to make sure that the risk manager is very clear on what makes sense to the entity and whereby are they going to add value. That's truly the part of the issue with risk management and the insurance person is, where do I add value in this chain of our entity? And if it's taking cost out, saving claims, where do you add value? And you need to be able to explain that in a manner that translates into dollars and cents, because that's truly what the business is about. It's a business. It's about dollars and cents.
The adaptability and flexibility. Nancy referred to this a little bit and about her experience with the University of Guelph. I think for all of us who are in this industry for any length of time, we probably have some level of attention deficit disorder. Because we do like the challenge of what's going to be on that phone or what's that next email going to bring, because every day you just don't know what's going to come on your plate. As much as you have an idea of what you want to get accomplished, that can be thrown totally sideways on you, depending on what's happening out there. And so from my perspective, this is one of the key things, that you just have to be able to adapt, to be flexible, and both of those also go with dealing with all different levels within the organization. And Nancy and Steve, any other comments that you want to make?
I think one of the key comments here is you've got to be open to new ideas and new concepts, and that's clearly, as a risk manager, we get stuck in our old ways. We get stuck in our old thing. Let's go get an insurance product. That may not be the right solution. It's often a good solution, but it may not be the right one. So we have to be open to say, is there a different way to do this? Is there a different way that we should be managing these risks? And if so, how can that be done? So it's key. I think you need to be very flexible and very adaptable.
And I think that's a really good message in terms of, because you don't want people to stop coming to you, to kind of say, okay, here's what we're dealing with, Nancy. You want them to be able to come to you so that you're shown to be open, and that you're shown to say, okay, well, let's sit down and brainstorm. It goes back to the old days and, sticky notes on the wall, where it seems so off the wall, but, you're pulling together all the ideas and brainstorming and looking at what's going to work. And, at the end of the day, is it worth it? Again, going back to the 5 steps. And you're building your credibility at the same time when you're talking about a risk manager's skills. So when we talk about that, I guess that's a good segue into the fact that it also impacts your personal reputation. Yes, your company, your employer wants you to be positive work ethic and, you know, stick for the challenges, and that's amazing. I mean, it also affects your bonus if you're in that kind of organization. But it also impacts your personal reputation. And again, I had talked about this before. You want to be viewed by the industry, and we've said that, you know, you never burn your bridges because you never know who's going to be across the table from you in what capacity. And risk managers may be in the brokerage side, you know, they may be an underwriter and come back into the risk management piece again. So it's really important that you maintain a positive reputation, a very good reputation, so that the third parties all realize that you know how to manage your account. And it doesn't matter, and Catherine and Stephen and I have all changed industries. We've applied the same skills and approach, and hopefully, you know, the reputation precedes us in the fact that, you know what, she's coming over to this new account. We know she has the skills and abilities, so it's going to be a well-risk managed account, so that there are entities that are interested in doing business with your company.
Yeah, we have to recognize that when we are sitting across the table from our partners, that we are the face of our companies. And so it's the importance of our own professional and work ethic out there. And
I liked your terminology you talked about before, being your personal brand.
Yes. Yeah.
I know in the interest of time, so I won't. I had a nice little story, but we'll save it for another day.
Go ahead.
No. Well, way back when, again, a long time ago, we had this claim whereby basically the insurer overcredited us to the tune of $385,000, and it was a calculation error. And so we basically ended up being able to provide that back. The insurer said, hey, this was a calculation error. They would never have found it, but we said that's not the right thing to do. The right thing to do is send this back. So it showed them, I hope to believe, that yes, we have the integrity and the ethics to make sure we do the right thing, but we're not out there to pooch somebody. We're wanting to make sure that if we're entitled to the money, we should be entitled to the right amount, and therefore, to your point, it adds that brand, that personal brand.
I think the next slide talks about natural curiosity, and we had two slides, and we've consolidated it into one, calling it natural curiosity. And the idea here is that we need to continue to be lifelong learners. And whether or not that involves taking courses external to what you're doing, your CIP, your CRM, any kind of improvement courses, but it's also being open to learning in different ways. I know that with AECON, we have AECON University, which is an online university, and we have amazing courses for our industry. So it's my job to make sure that I'm keeping abreast of what's out there within our own industry, and it's just, you know, never closing a door to opportunities to learn.
And even internally to that point, volunteer maybe perhaps to be on different committees within your organization, even if you're just there to, you know, provide small input. You learn more about what's going on in your company by volunteering to be involved internally on committees, and you get to know other people within the organization.
And another thing here is, and hopefully Tina she won't mind this pitch, but the idea as well is that I've learned an awful lot by being able to volunteer on the ORIMS board, and I think Nancy will say the same thing from RIMS.
Exactly.
So taking those opportunities that are presented to you, and it gives you the opportunity to not only to learn, but to network. And let's be honest, this is an industry of networking.
And RIMS was instrumental in my personal and professional development, and being involved. Like, I'd never spoken in front of 200 people before, let alone 2,000. So, and even having it, you know, interpreted in Japan. So it's a great opportunity. Your point's very well taken.
Yeah, the only last point on that, if I can, a risk manager's job is to ask questions. And so just because somebody comes to you with one set of, I'll say, facts, you must be prepared to challenge it. We call it our second line of defense. You must challenge what's presented to you, so don't be afraid to ask the question. Look underneath the rock. Look underneath the what they're providing you to make sure that you have this innate curiosity. You just don't take everything at face value. That's my only comment there.
Well, and I think that that's a nice segue into the, what is our second last slide, which is persuasion. And it's, as we talked about when we were putting this presentation together, a lot of us don't have significant budgets, and we're dealing with other budgets within our organization. And part of what we do is, as an influencer and persuader, is to get our message across to those internally to understand why, if we're bringing loss control and loss prevention ideas to them, how they need to spend their budgets. And what we're doing is, it's a form of persuasion. That's one of the items that we talked about. And Nancy and Steve, any other comments?
Just how you market your message. Look at what your goals are and what your end result is, what you want it to be.
Yeah, and again, maybe I'll give an example of a persuasion that I found successful. Again, know the market, know the audience. I was asked to do a store manager's presentation to the various store managers when at Sears, and we had this ongoing current issue about people tripping over what they call display pads. These are pads where you put items up for display, and it being the same color as the carpet. Well, we found people tripping over because they didn't see the difference in carpet. So I don't have the budget. I needed the store managers to support their budget. So talking about claims and trying to say, okay, here's the dollar value of the claims in over a year wasn't going to offset the cost of doing it. So I had to take a different tack. I took a tack of showing our injured clients, taking pictures of the clients that were in their stores who came in to spend money but went home with broken bones or their arms in a cast or pins. I found that position much more persuasive to get their buy-in to spend the money to put in and fix the mat. So again, it's about persuasion, knowing the audience, having the effective communication, knowing where you can influence in order to get the desired outcome.
And to conclude our presentation, this is just a bit of a summary that hopefully ties everything together. And bringing back all of the items that we talked about and how you bring those into your day-to-day work experience. And how we have found, these are sort of, we'll call them the top 10. I think we did 10. And what we have found over our 90-plus years of experience is that, we need to be adaptive. We need to continue to understand our organizations. And we need to be proactive with regards to this industry that we're calling risk management.
And I think if you kind of apply some of the things that we talked about today, your employers will view you as engaged and also, working towards what's in the best interest of the company. So that'll also further your own personal and challenge. You want to be challenged. You want to be continually asking yourself, what do we need to be doing?
I think we have a chance to do a couple of quick questions. And we had someone send in a question that says, how closely does the risk management department for each of these companies that we work with, do we work with our business continuity department? And so, and I can speak from, I think I can speak from an AECON perspective. I don't at this current time deal with sort of the business continuity issues. And that doesn't surprise me. I'm still very new with the company. I'm going to go through my first renewal coming up, first full renewal coming up. And I'm sure that as I get into it, I will be dealing with our finance department to understand how the implications, and in particular, Fort McMurray, has with us in some of our business areas.
When I was at OCAD University, I was responsible for development of the risk management program, evolving from environmental health and safety. And actually, I worked with a third-party consultant to develop their business continuity plan. So there were a lot of interrelation kinds of things. And at Sears, Stephen can talk probably more so than I, because he was probably involved in setting it up. But we were responsible for the corporate crisis management team.
Steve, anything from your end at CIBC?
Did we lose you?
I think we lost Steve. One of the questions that came up is I referenced AECON University Learning, and that is only an internal resource. That's on our intranet site, and that is an internal resource to AECON employees. There was also, I think, a question about Rebo credits.
Sorry, it's Stephen here. I dropped off, and I just wanted to let you know from our perspective, when I was at Sears, I was responsible for business continuity. So it can be interplayed with the risk management group. Where I'm at now, we were in the same group, but they've moved off to a different group, but I am still part of the process. Sorry.
So from a few people have asked about REBO credits, and this is something that we will let James and the ORIMS board get back to folks about. And we did mention, I think, at the beginning that the presentation will be available.
Yep.
And as we also mentioned that there are some resources that we've tacked on to the back of it for you, so that the links are there for you.
Yeah, so everyone will get an email by the end of the week with a copy of the presentation once it's made available, and the contact info for the presenters today, as well as the links included in the presentation.
And I just wanted to say thanks not only to James, but also Catherine and Stephen. I've really enjoyed, chatting. It's really great to kind of think about these things and kind of reminisce a little bit about, what's evolved and where we can come today. And I think I still learn, like I say, something new every single day. So that's what keeps me engaged and challenged within this community. And I have to say, too, somebody else recently commented on this as well, but one of the things that really engaged me way back in the beginning, back in the 1989s, is that I've never been involved in an industry where, even though I'm in competition with some of the folks, our companies in competition, an industry that's so willing to help each other and to share information and, mentor and with my peers. So that's a really good resource for you. Attend social functions even and talk to your peers. It's a really valuable tool.
Perfect. So I just want to thank our speakers today, Nancy, Catherine, and Stephen. Thank you for putting this great presentation together.
You're welcome.
So everyone just be on the